From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 112. We're going to be hosting a new addition to the CSP Florida staff for this call, and it's a really fun one for me because this is a guy who started out as an athlete with us, then interned with us, and then went out and did his thing and did some really cool things, both in the strength and conditioning and baseball world, and now he's just come back to join our team. And on a personal level, it's always super satisfying when you see someone that, really takes their career and does some amazing things with it after they were, effectively a student with you back in the day. And now he's here and he's teaching me new things each day and asking great questions and challenging us to be better in a variety of ways. So he's quickly become very, very popular with both our athletes and our staff alike. So I think we're in for a really cool show. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states, on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where Athletic Greens can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. And that's why I use it daily and recommend it to our athletes. 1 scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multimineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. They work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid in digestion, recovery, and supporting of a healthy immune system. This all can happen without taking multiple products. While most nutritional products come to market and stay stagnant, Athletic Greens continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing 53 improvements over the last decade. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best daily nutritional habit on the planet. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. They put 75 ingredients through the NSF for Sport certification to come up with a formula that's trusted by some of the world's best athletes, including our own. Right now, Athletic Greens is giving our listeners 10 free travel packets with their subscription. Simply go to athleticgreens.com/Cressey to receive my offer. These travel packs are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health when you're traveling for games, training, or simply when you're on the go. They can be a great counterbalance to less than ideal on-the-road food options. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance to get nutrient diversity, then head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and get your 10 free travel packets today. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY. Today's guest was an athlete at CSP Massachusetts in 2014 while attending Emporia State University. At ESU, he was a vital part of the 2014 MIA Conference Championship team, as well as a participant in 2 NCAA Division II regional tournaments. Upon graduating with his BS in Health and Human Performance, he spent the summer of 2015 interning at CSP Florida. At the conclusion of this internship, he began his professional career as the strength and conditioning coach at Premier Baseball Kansas City. He now returns to CSP Florida as our new pitching coordinator, following a 6-year run as the co-founder at Kansas City Strength and Conditioning, where he served as both the strength and conditioning coach and the director of pitching. While in Kansas City, he built a reputation for delivering both high-quality strength and conditioning protocols and high-level pitching instruction. During his tenure at KCSC, he was able to guide several athletes from the high school ranks into professional baseball. His thorough understanding of the human body gives him a unique lens to view pitching development through. He brings experience working with athletes of all ages and skill level. We're psyched to have Matt Hinkley as our new pitching coordinator at Cressey Sports Performance, Florida. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So we are January 24th in Jupiter, Florida, and it was like 38 degrees this morning when I woke up. You just moved here from Kansas City. Is this a shock for you? Do you think were we like selling you false bill of goods here?
No, it's funny. I was talking with Tanner and Schoenberg earlier, and I was telling him, I've been here for a little bit over a month now, and it didn't take me very long to turn into one of those Florida snowflakes because I was freezing this morning.
Your blood thins out quick, no doubt about it.
It does. It didn't take very long. So.
Well, now that we've kind of alluded to Kansas City, I think it's probably a good place to start. Let's talk about your roots. So as I alluded to in the intro to the show, you were a CSP athlete before you were a CSP intern and now a CSP staff member. So maybe talk about your path that led you to CSP all the way back to your college career, and then we'll take it from there.
For sure. So yeah, I started out my collegiate baseball career at a junior college called Hutch Junior College. It's in the middle of Kansas, middle of nowhere. It was like going back in time, going to school there. It was just a little podunk Kansas town, and I learned a lot about myself there. But I ended up transferring to Emporia State University, which is it's a Division II school in the MIAA. So we were playing schools like Central Missouri, who just got, I think, national runner-up in Division II. It was a pretty stout conference for Division II baseball. So it was good from a competition standpoint. It was also good from a learning standpoint for me, and it's kind of took me a long time to appreciate it because from a strength conditioning or baseball development resource standpoint, they're kind of balling on a budget, for lack of a better term. So it was very humble beginnings as far as my formal path to CSP. So I was actually dealing with a little bit of arm trouble after my sophomore year. And instead of going to play summer ball, I jumped on the internet and I Googled baseball training. And this dates it back to 2014. But I jumped on Google, did the baseball search, and up popped a video that you guys did. It was actually an old highlight reel of your first facility. I believe Tim Collins' dad was interviewed in the video. It's pretty a retro video. But at that point on, I kind of dove deeper into the website and it looked like something like what I was looking for. I was dealing with a little bit of arm troubles. So convinced my best friend Jared that it was what we needed to do that summer. And we ended up renting a place up in Jamaica Plain, downtown Boston.
Right. I forgot about that.
And drove back and forth for essentially the entire summer, just fully immersed in training. And I've told this story a few times, but I actually think it was Connor McNally that was an intern there at the time. Yeah. But I think it was the fourth day, and at that point I had zero formal background in strength conditioning, kinesiology, pitching formally at all. So I walked up to Connor and I was like, "Hey man, how do I do this?" And he gave me a pretty short checklist of things to walk through. The first one was just to express interest to you guys that I potentially want to get involved in the industry. He also told me to just work really, really hard throughout my training programs. He mentioned that I was already getting interviewed, and that kind of stuck with me. When I looked around the room, I think a lot of the interns back at that time in 2014, I think you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe every one of those guys had a master's degree in exercise physiology.
They might have.
So it was a pretty stout class, some really bright guys. I think Christian Wonders was in that group as well.
He was, for sure.
Who's come a long way through the network as well. But honestly, training at CSP, it immediately lit a fire in me that I didn't know existed. I'd done a little bit of coaching in the winter as a collegiate kid just to make some money back home. But the whole private sector, the culture that was present at CSP was just something that I fell in love with. So then, that following spring, I applied for the internship. This is early 15. You guys had just moved down to Florida. And I think I was the second or third intern class down there in the summertime.
Yeah, summer 15 was number 3.
Yeah. So, spent the summer with Cap and Shane and the entire staff, and it was incredible. I'm glad that my first taste of, formal strength conditioning / pitching development was at CSP, because if I didn't go down that rabbit hole, if I, Googled the wrong thing, who knows where I would have ended up in the coaching spectrum. But no, that's in short how I ended up, here now. So
I think, you did a good job of dating that, talking about 2014, because the industry was not in 2014 what it is now.
right? We didn't
Correct.
have high-speed cameras. We didn't have the ability, to go and, and quantify pitch metrics and things like that. I mean, you were working with Matt Blake, who's now, obviously our pitching coach of the Yankees, but, Matt was at that time very much kind of like first to market with a lot of the video analysis, and what he was doing in the private sector would be considered, cutting edge by, all 30 major league organizations at the time. So did you have a sense, like at the time, that you were on the cusp of, kind of like a little bit of a pitching revolution? Were you too like novice at that point to maybe appreciate it, that it was that much differentiated?
I think that I had like just this innate like gut feeling that it was something different. It was something really big. I mean, I'm looking around the room, and it's just the total energy, and the fact that I went from having a ton of arm pain to feeling no arm pain after a summer of just lifting weights. That was completely novel to me. But as far as, I don't think I fully appreciated it simply because I was so naive to the world. I was so green. But hindsight's 2020. But again, I look back reflectively, really thankful that I fell into your guys' lap in that sense. So
obviously you do that, you go back, you play baseball, and then you do
Yep.
a strength and conditioning internship the following summer. So I'm curious, like how have those experiences, obviously you went the strength and conditioning route thereafter, and, we can talk a little bit about kind of the progression, but how did that experience, eventually allow you to connect the dots between, predominantly strength and conditioning, and now you're really exclusively pitching? What was the thing that allowed you to draw those parallels?
Well, luckily as an intern, I was able to kind of immerse myself into both worlds. So I spent my mornings during the internship throwing with guys, and I think like I really credit Cap to taking me under his wing at that point in the game. But I was able to see both sides of the coin right away coming out of college, and kind of immerse myself in appreciation for just general movement, whether it be like what a hinge is supposed to look like, what a squat should look like, how guys should move around on one leg, what rotational power should look like from the sense of medicine ball throws and throwing, and being able to kind of connect the dots between the two. I think that diving deep into like assessment protocols was something that, from a pitching standpoint, I didn't really know how impactful it would be on the front end. But again, with years and years of doing this, I don't think you can separate the two worlds at all. And the synergy between the two is what sold me on CSP as an athlete and as an intern. And now, I mean, it's 100% the reason I'm here now is because I can talk to guys that understand, hey, somebody's struggling to get to their glove side with a fastball. Well, let's peek at T-spine rotation. Let's see how their scaps move. Let's talk about all those different intrinsic things and see if we can piece this thing together as a team versus, a pitching coach that doesn't ever get exposed to strength and conditioning is looking at this through the lens of, I'm just going to spin my wheels with mechanical cues and adjustments when, sometimes there's a much easier and efficient answer. So I think that was something that was huge for me is just learning how an appreciation for the assessment side of the spectrum and the general movement side of the spectrum can make the adjustments on the pitching side a little bit more refined, a little bit more intentional.
I've always said that it's an easier path to take a pitcher and teach him strength and conditioning than it is to take a strength and conditioning coach and teach him pitching. And the reason is it's very simple. It's context, right? Because when
Yep.
you've pitched and even, to some degree served as a pitching coach, everything you pick up in the weight room, it's a progressive aha moment. That's why I couldn't get into that pitch, or that's why
Yep.
I couldn't execute, whatever I was trying to do. And you just don't get the same things. If you come from a strength and conditioning background and someone teaches you how to hold a four seam, it doesn't really like resonate with you in a special way. Would that be your agreement as well? That
Oh,
progression was the way to do it?
I 100% agree. And I mean, it's funny. I was talking, it's blanking on me who I was speaking with this about earlier, but it's funny to me that like the word hinge is all of a sudden something that's groundbreaking in the pitching scope, and we're coming at this from an angle of strength coaches where it's like, well, that's a foundational movement pattern. And now all of a sudden it's you hear pitching coaches and pitching Twitter, especially, where it's a conversation piece again, which is a good thing. Right. But I think that just goes to where the gaps were and where the gaps still are from an S&C, a medical, just integration on a grand scale.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of fast forward a little bit. And there's a tendency for a lot of young coaches to get overzealous with making adjustments. But if there's one thing I've noticed, I've known you obviously from afar, and then obviously for the last 6 weeks or so in person, much more regularly. You have a very pensive / patient way about you. So I guess this is a necessarily vague question. How do you know when to stay conservative versus pushing forward the tinker? And to give you some context, like I think one of the things that's interesting is we really don't know what perfect mechanics are, right? Like there's so many different
Correct.
ways to be deceptive, to create movement, to create velocity. And Ben Hansen was a previous guest who said, you know what, most of the time mechanical optimization is about improving performance. We don't really know what keeps guys healthy, as much as we think we do. So I'm always fascinated when pitching coaches are adamant that you need to make an aggressive mechanical change when they're, sometimes there are ways you can improve somebody physically, all that. So I guess, for you personally, how do you know when to stay conservative, with a mild tinker, if at all, versus, something that might warrant a more substantial overhaul?
Yeah, I think that this conversation starts just by simply looking at previous year's success. If guys are rocking and rolling and they have plus stuff, whether it be velocity, command, stuff, I don't think mechanical overhaul is something that should ever be encouraged in that situation. I think it always drove me nuts as a player when I would first I transferred to a school and I had 3 different pitching coaches, and every year it was like there was a little bit of a different message, and the message was instantly sent my way before the coach even knew who I was or what made me work. So I think that there's a little bit of a learning curve to understand what makes an athlete tick. That could be from a mindset standpoint, just a coachability standpoint, a physicality standpoint, or even just like mental fortitude. Like I think that it takes a lot of feel as a coach to understand which athletes can accept that, which athletes are a little bit more cerebral and they can handle the information, and which kids can't. I think if you take an athlete that's, and this was something that in the Midwest was not super uncommon with a lot of the smaller towns, but I played college ball with guys that never had a pitching lesson before they ended up in collegiate baseball. And they were so externally focused to just blow the glove up and throw hard that as soon as you start trying to talk to them about mechanics and they become a little bit more internally focused, they could tend to struggle a little bit when it comes to command or having the right mindset or you name it. So I think in those situations, like tinkering doesn't make a ton of sense, but I do think tinkering makes sense if an athlete has professional baseball desires with average to below average stuff. With technology on the forefront, I think that the gap's going to become larger and larger and larger between the guys that can take the information and the guys that can't. So if you naturally don't have plus velocity, command, or stuff, I think that it's time to get to work. It's time to try some things. It's time to get creative. I also think that there's something to be said for encouraging tinkering when an athlete struggled a little bit, or if we've looked at the analytics and let's say that somebody does need to make an adjustment with pitch usage. I mean, I think that that's something that's a little bit less daunting as far as the adjustment for the athlete, but I think that it could still be profound when it comes to, how small the gap is between good and great at the professional level. There's something to be said also for taking chances with guys that just have nothing to lose. I mean, if you're a 22-year-old kid and you're telling me that you want to make one more go at professional baseball, we can get creative. We can try some things, whether it be weighted ball throwing or, you name it at that point. But this whole conversation comes down to having feel as a coach. I'd like to add, just if you're going to recommend any kind of an adjustment with a professional athlete or a higher end athlete that has had success and believes in what he's doing at a really high level, you definitely better do your homework, because these athletes are becoming more and more educated day by day. And if you are just throwing something at the wall and hoping that they'll buy into it and think that you're a genius, a lot of athletes are going to read through that pretty quickly and sift through that. So,
I think we also forget that, like, we hear this word tinker, like the automatic assumption is that we're talking about the delivery, right?
Yep.
But Kevin Arminio is a real good friend of mine. He was a pitching coach at Kennesaw State for a while, and he came up and shadowed us in Mass probably in 2007, 2008. We were really new. And he said, every passing year, I think of myself more as a manager of pitchers than I do as an actual pitching coach. It's so much more about how we plan out the week, how we select the right drill work, all these different things, than it is just about coaching mechanics. So,
Yep.
I mean, when I hear the word tinker, it could very easily be an adjustment to an overall training routine. It could be, the removal of like systemic fatigue. It doesn't have to just be this mechanical thing, because as we alluded to earlier, like that's the single most debated part of this whole pitching concept is, are these mechanics optimal for your body? Why would you change that when there's other stuff? Hey, this guy's sleeping 4 hours a night and drinking too much alcohol. Like let's focus on the low hanging fruit for sure.
I think it's really easy to look at all those things in isolation and think that it's an easy answer, whether it be on the analytics side or even on the mechanics side, right? I think that it's hard to factor in at times, well, did this guy's girlfriend just break up with him? Is he going through some stuff with his family? I think that having that bird's eye view really helps keep everything in perspective. And it makes me more cautious as a coach to, being quick on my toes as far as making adjustments. I really want to have full context before diving in and giving advice. So
I think there's also an aspect of this, and there's a million questions you can ask about whether an athlete should change something, right? Have they been hurt? Have they been ineffective? Are they novice enough to pick it up quickly? Is there a way we can test the waters with like a minimum effective dose to see if it works? Maybe that's like a constraint based model or something like that. But I think the one that I come back to the most is, how can you involve the athlete in the decision making process with respect to those modifications? In other words, like, how do you get buy-in for them so that they're wildly confident? Because if they go into it second guessing whatever it is, inherently it's going to fail before you even attempt it.
For sure.
So kind of building all this, does this approach change at different times of year, right? Like I think we've had some really good dialogues about, I have a Massachusetts background, you have a Kansas City background. Like it's much easier to develop high school arms in those areas where there's a relatively standardized calendar. You're down in Florida now. Like, do the conversations have to, really, be governed by what the competitive calendar looks like?
100%. I mean, just to play devil's advocate, I think that if we are talking about a Midwestern kid or a northern or northeast part of the country where, October through February is allocated to development or to an off season or to another sport for that matter. I think that, like, at least the way that I've prioritized a calendar year in the past, I think the early off season or September through November during a pro off season is a little bit more tinker heavy, or, late October through Thanksgiving would be a little bit more tinker heavy if tinkering is deemed necessary from a mechanical lens. Early off season, it's a good opportunity to work on pitch grips. If you are going to make any kind of mechanical adjustments, I think that it makes a little bit more sense early in the process, because as throwing starts to ramp up and we start to really prepare for bullpens, I think that it's important to just neurally groove things to where they become almost second nature. And I think it's important to shift from a little bit more of an intrinsic focus to a little bit more of an extrinsic focus when it comes to playing catch and executing and being a pitcher in the truest sense of the word. So I find myself that, like, late in the year, I'm rarely doing anything as far as large overhaul or tinkering, because by this time of year, I just think that the priority should shift, whether it be, squaring away some things in the weight room or executing pitches in a bullpen and talking about mindset. I just think that the scope of what I would want to do with somebody does absolutely change throughout the year. And it's in Florida, you got to get a little bit more creative. Just simply, you already alluded to this, but where there is no off season, you have to be very, very tactful with this. And yeah,
when you talk about, like, we kind of just highlighted the geographic differences, but, like, unique demands, obviously, like, Florida kids get more competition than they know what to do with, right? They can round up, like, pick up baseball if they want to, but, with your Kansas City guys, your warmer weather climates, what are the gaps that you need to fill in the cracks on? Because we both know you can be an elite player in Kansas City and wind up with like 35 innings on the year if you're not careful, between like getting snowed out, maybe being on a team that's not very good, you miss the postseason, then you go to summer ball and it's this like 1 inning a week showcase circuit, and before you know it, you're 6 months deep on the season. You've only actually thrown 35 innings.
I think fostering competition indoors is something that you have to get really creative with. And a lot of, like, when I was in Kansas City operating at KCSC, we did that. I mean, it was live ABs. We'd foster competition in any way that we could. it's funny. I was down here, and I think it was the second week of working in Florida, and there was a 12-year-old talking about, throwing a 12-6 curveball off a high heater. It's like the baseball IQ of these kids that are playing year round. It's on a different level from the kids in the Midwest at 12 years old. I'm not taking a shot at Kansas City or Massachusetts in that sense, but there's a little bit of catch up that has to be played from a X's and O's standpoint. Now, from a physicality standpoint, I don't really necessarily think that, like a Massachusetts athlete's going to roll out of bed looking a whole lot different than an athlete in Florida. I think it comes down to just time in the trenches that really does benefit these athletes down here. So, and it's obviously a double-edged sword because I think we avoid a little bit more of the overuse stuff in the colder weather states, and down here, you have to be very cautious of that, just because kids are already playing competitive games right now, and it's January 24th.
So we talked a little bit about like this concept of kind of finding development wherever you possibly can, whether it's chasing more competition or changing the yearly calendar or looking at the mechanical side of things. But I know you spent a lot of time with the Edgertronic camera, and that's something that has been a useful addition to your offerings. I'm curious though. You made one comment to me. I was asking about it, and you said that it usually didn't, in most cases, lead to an adjustment, but rather a reaffirmation. So can you elaborate on that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of start by just saying that, like, if adjustments are something that we deem necessary, I think that Edgertronic video and Rapsodo and TrackMan are incredibly profound in just shortening the learning curve. I mean, I can take an Edgertronic camera video and show a kid exactly how I want a 12-6 curveball to look and pull out 10 comps for him to study and understand, whether it be taking a young athlete and really highlighting what good spin should look like or good hand positions at release should look like. Because I know as a kid, I was completely naive to that. So I think that can be very, very profound. And I think it's also crucial to just understand what leads to coming to the ball out of the hand in the first place. So whether it be global kinematics or requisite range of motion to get guys into good positions, or back hip loading mechanics, timing, rhythm, just general overall athleticism that lead to that small little video that we're looking at. I think that we can't ever lose sight of that. I think I made a post about that last week. But when it comes to Edgertronic video, we are looking at such a very small snapshot that I don't necessarily think that just cueing ball out of the hand all day long is going to get us where we need to go. However, I do think that there's massive value in taking Edgertronic video of athletes on a really good day. So if their stuff's really clicking and we've got the camera out, I want to get a little bit of a snapshot, for lack of a better term, of all of their stuff. Because if things ever fly off the rails throughout the year, we've got something to lean into to, number one, reaffirm that they've already done it before so they can do it again. But number two, if they're not getting spin that they desire out of the baseball, it's easy for us to go back to that Edgertronic video to kind of reverse engineer and connect the dots to get them back to where they need to be. I think that there's also value in tracking athletes on Edger over time to compare longer term adjustments. So whether it be an athlete that's never trained at CSP that comes in and gains a ton of range of motion and strength, I want to see over time how that affects ball out of the hand. And if we're taking an athlete that's super loose and creating some stiffness, is that adjusting the way that breaking balls are spinning or changeups are getting executed? I think that there's massive value there. So
where do you see folks going wrong with the use of high speed cameras? Like where it's not always perfect, because we do see people that get into bad places with them.
Yeah, I think that, like, I alluded to this a little bit just a second ago, but I think, like, not understanding global kinematics. I think that guys that look at Edgertronic video and it's such a small little snapshot of the ball coming out of the hand, giving all of your recommendations based on that small little window, it's kind of doing the athlete a disservice, because I think that at the end of the day, we've got to appreciate range of motion. I think we have to appreciate stiffness. I think we have to appreciate general athleticism and how well the athlete repeats their delivery. Like if you've got a 14-year-old kid that's mechanics look different every time he pitches, and you're you're leaning into like an edgertronic camera to make massive adjustments with him, you might set the camera up in the same place for every bullpen and miss his arm in the frame completely on a bad day. So I mean, it goes back to like expecting a loose and or weak hypermobile pitcher to be able to watch poor execution of a breaking ball in slow motion and magically create the tension that he needs to spin it the right way. So I think it comes back to just appreciating anatomy, and I go back to just being able to lean into that initial evaluation and ask questions to the right people, whether it be, going to Shane or going to Schoenberg and Tanner or you guys. It's something that's incredibly valuable in our scope right now. So.
I think it always comes back to like you have all this technology, whether it's actually ball tracking, the high speed camera, any of that stuff it always needs to drive some kind of intervention. You know what I mean?
Correct.
How do you get the athlete to fix themselves, right? Because we can say, all right, your supination stinks. We're going to have some soft tissue work for you, and your supination is going to get better, and hopefully it'll magically lead to a better breaking ball. But I think it always comes back to like, what's the intervention that makes the athlete take ownership of it and actually create some kind of lasting change that's both demonstrable in terms of those outcome measures that they're hanging their hat on, but also, something that's sustainable over an extended period of time.
Absolutely. And I think even from like a biomechanics standpoint, I think that number one, like getting an initial snapshot and then having that conversation of just like, hey, this is where we're at right now. And these are the resources at our disposal. And this is where we're going to take you. I think that's what sold me as an athlete to come to CSP in the first place. Is it was the plan to get me, number one, out of pain, and number two, performing at a higher level. And I think that pitch design, biomechanics, you name it, all of those things come back to that. What is the intervention? What's the plan here?
So I'm going to jump ahead. This is going to be one of my lightning round questions, but I think it fits well here. So when you look at all of these magic toys that you have at your fingertips, like which of them would you have utilized the most to help Matt Hinkley circa 2014 as a pitcher? Obviously we talked about getting healthy being the most important thing, but describe yourself as a pitcher and how you would utilize a lot of these resources to have made yourself better.
So I was kind of that naive kid coming out of high school that just had a little bit of a power arm and a pretty good breaking ball. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but the ball tended to miss barrels. So I had a lot of success in high school and found my way into pretty successful colleges. But, after changing some things from a strength standpoint and going to several different pitching coaches over a very small window, Matt Blake, Ron Woolforth. I was exposed to quite a bit in a very short amount of time. I don't think I was equipped from a filter standpoint to be able to utilize what I really did well with and not be able to push aside the bad information. So I think if I could go back and talk to 20-year-old Matt Hinkley, I think I would have told him to have a better filter for information. But I think from a technology standpoint, like if somebody sat down and really talked to me about how to chase certain spin directions and how to utilize the edgertronic camera to elicit the movement that I wanted, I think it could have saved me, because my last 2 years I struggled to spin the baseball. I kind of lost my slider, which was a put away pitch for me for a really long time. And even at the Division II level where I was playing, if you're a 1 or 2 pitch guy and you don't have a plus pitch in that mix, you're gonna have a long day. And I kind of paid for that my senior year just a little bit. Arm felt great, but I just kind of lost that like proprioception for spinning the baseball the way that I needed to execute. And I think that I could have made the adjustment before things got too carried away had I had the resource there. So
interesting. Let's dig in a little bit on the mental side of pitching. Because I know it's something you dedicated yourself to pretty heavily. Maybe it's just the left-handed guy in you, or maybe it's just a function of dealing with so many different athletes in different geographic realms. But where do you find these discussions going with pitchers these days? What are the key conversation pieces with both the younger and more advanced athletes that you're working with?
Yeah, so I think like from an overarching like ideal standpoint, I think that with this increase in technology and this increase on physically, we're learning a heck of a lot more about pitchers, and we're learning a heck of a lot more about spin. We're learning a lot more about how to create certain pitches. I think it's really important to also keep in mind the mental side of the game as a coach and as an athlete. as you're navigating development in and of itself. But when it comes to the actual mental game, some of these guys have been around the block a super long time, and I'm gonna throw their names out here, but I think that the principles that they've kind of hammered home still register today. One of the most impactful guys in my neck of the woods as far as the mental game is a guy named Brent Chemnitz, who was a longtime pitching coach at Wichita State. He's actually released a few different materials about the mental game. Another one would be Brian Kane, for Brian Kane Peak Performance. And then as of late, I read 90% Mental by Bob Tewksbury, and I really found a lot of giant takeaway pieces that I think I could armor guys with as a coach nowadays. So when it comes down to mental toughness, I think for me, it comes down to a few really, really basic principles as a coach. Number one, I think that understanding that there's a learning curve whenever you're making an adjustment or introducing anything new to an athlete. Typically and I found this as a coach over the last several years, is if you introduce something new to an athlete, the day of, they typically will have like instant initial success. And I can't objectively express what I'm getting at here, but when I've thrown a new cue at an athlete, instantly it works, and I'm the greatest coach in the world. More times than not, that's preceded by a little bit of failure. Sometimes the athlete goes backwards in a little bit of a sense. So I think just appreciating that, like, change is hard for any athlete because they've grooved these patterns for a really long time, or they've thrown one way for a really long time. And to me, it comes back to the whole mantra of, I don't want to overhaul a pitcher or make giant changes until that athlete fails or seeks change. I think that I allude this to some problems in professional baseball, and I've worked with some guys over the year where, they'll get drafted and, go into pro ball really confident in what they're doing. The first day they're having their pitch grips tinkered with. And all of a sudden they go out and struggle, and then it's the pitching coach's fault and the wheels start spinning. So I think that we have to be very, very tactful of that. I also think that as a coach, it's important to work off of positives. So anytime an athlete does something that you're, in favor of, complimenting the good. And then if you're ever going to adjust something or you want to make a recommendation, I think it's important to have like a positive, negative, positive model. So when I coach, like, let's say, like, okay, I love the way you competed today. You went out there, you threw great. However, like, mechanically, it looked like you were pulling a little bit with your glove side late. I think if we clean that up, you're going to have a lot more success later in the game commanding to your extension side or being able to get that glove side fastball where you need to get it. So just, starting with something positive, sprinkling in the coaching cue, and then going back to something positive. I think that it keeps things in a positive manner when you're talking to the athlete versus like, look, your breaking ball's awful, your mechanics stink, and your hip shoulder separation's brutal. I'd walk away from that conversation going, okay, well, I found out that I'm terrible. So I also think that, and we're lucky in the sense that at CSP, but as a coach, it's important to be able to connect athletes with guys that have been in the trenches or have a similar makeup. I think that it ends up being like just something that they can mentally and verbally vet to whenever they go through tough times. And when it comes to being a player, I think being mentally tough, I think it comes from having this internal fortitude of like understanding what makes you special as an athlete. Are you a guy that relies on nasty movement? Are you just a fierce competitor? I think like clearly defining that and internally and visualizing success daily is huge. I think it's super easy, especially in this social media ridden world, to get down to a really, really negative rabbit hole. So having these things of, your positive self-talk that acts as almost an anchor to bring you back to a good place. It's hard. Pitching's hard enough. And when you're in a negative headspace, I think that it's really, really tough to pull yourself out. Another mantra that I think a player should live by is, every day you practice, you're either going to leave better or worse. You're never going to leave the same. And this is something that Brent Chemnitz really hammered home. So each day when an athlete shows up, I don't care if it's phase 1 of an off season and they're playing light catch 3 days a week. I think it's really important that they have a plan, that there's an intent with everything they're doing, whether it be, going through a warm up on the strength and conditioning side, or playing catch with intent, or executing lifts with really, really specific intent. I think it's super easy, especially when it comes to selling some of the arm care exercises that we give kids, that we prescribe kids. They're not necessarily the most fun exercises in the world, they're not going to get a ton of likes on Twitter, but they're really profound if they're done the right way for a really long time. So I think that if you believe in your plan, it's really, really easy to go that route. When it comes to pitching in and of itself, I think that one of my favorite mantras is just having confidence at the end of the throw. And baseball people understand this, but when you play catch with somebody and you catch the ball or you throw the ball, you doubt it, it gets turned around, or your partner knows that you're not throwing it with confidence. When you deal, you have a clear mind. You're not really thinking about a whole heck of a lot. You're not thinking about your mechanics, outside opinions, anything. You're being confident and you're letting your arm work. And this comes with having a really relaxed intensity on the mound. So when I'm working with pitchers, I want to make sure that the guys are fired up. They're competitors, but at the same time, you can't take a special teams approach to the pitching mound, or else you're going to be a absolutely coin to one inning guy. Pitching comes with loose, free, and easy movement, and more times than not, if you're muscling up and you're getting too big on the mound, that can lead to some erratic misses and tiring out really quickly. And the final 2 points I want to make here is just when you're really, really deeply concentrated, I think that it helps eliminate tension on the mound. So the more locked in you can be, the harder it is to be nervous. And I think that if you're concentrated and you're confident, you're going to be mentally tough on the baseball field. The last thing that I try to bring this energy into the cage when I'm working with pitchers. Baseball's a game, and I think sometimes we forget that. Having a little bit of a little league mentality, it keeps things fun. And I make the point all the time. It's like when you're playing in your backyard, it's pretty hard to miss your spot because you're so relaxed. Baseball's easy whenever you don't care. And I say that with intent of when you have that loose, free, and easy mindset, like you're just playing in your backyard with your buddies, you tend to do some pretty athletic things.
Sure.
So honestly, when it comes down to the mental game, you can't separate the physiological. It's really hard to be a confident guy if you don't have the stuff. But at the same time, if you have the stuff, if you believe in your process from a physical standpoint, and mentally you're doing whatever you need to do from a visualization standpoint, from a process standpoint, I think it can go a long way to keeping you in a good headspace.
I think we touched on it a little bit earlier. This concept of being a pitching manager more than a pitching coach. I think some of the stuff you just outlined is vital in that regard as well. As you can trust your preparation. That's always something you can fall back on. I remember Justin Blood when he was at the University of Connecticut making that same kind of point at the baseball coaches convention at Mohegan Sun years ago. But I'm curious if you had to outline your ideal competitive calendar, for a 15-year-old athlete looking to improve as a pitcher, where do you start? What's the discussion when you have with that player as well as his parents?
Yeah, I think that it's important to be number one, have a conversation, because we had this conversation a little bit ago, but if you're a kid in the Midwest, you've got the clearly defined off season more times than not. If you're a kid in Florida, we have to, number one, have that conversation. Is fall ball going to happen? Or how many games are you going to be playing this summer? So on and so forth. But let's just say, for the sake of the example, that we're speaking to a kid that is playing in the summertime and is considering fall ball and playing for his school, and that's it. If that 15-year-old athlete were to come to me, let's say at the end of a summer in late July, early August, I would encourage at that point in the game a little bit of a shutdown. So whether it be 4 to 8 weeks, if they're an athlete that has a lot of hypermobility and they continue to gain range of motion as they throw. I think that a little bit of a longer break period makes a little bit more sense at that point in the game. Now, if an athlete is we deem that they're really stiff and they want to lightly play catch, I'm okay with that. But I would recommend that on the front end, some type of shutdown, whether it be a stone cold shutdown or just a light catch, active shutdown where they're playing catch a couple times a week without really gassing it up a whole lot. But in a perfect world, I honestly think that we'd treat our high school athletes in a similar light to our pro athletes from a workload management standpoint. So that August to September timeframe during the early off season, If I can get a kid convinced to not play fall ball, which I know down here is going to be a much different chore than it was back in Kansas City, because it's, you're talking about playing in 30-degree weather with sleet. It's a little bit of an easier sell to convince somebody not to play versus down here where it's sunny and 75 every day. But when we're first starting to throw again in the beginning of an on-ramp, I would recommend like 3 times a week of throwing with rest days snuck in between at a lower intensity. That second phase, so like that September to October range, this would be still that like 3 to 4 times a week of throwing. This is where we'd get a little bit more drill heavy with the tinkering. And the intensity is starting to creep up a little bit more towards a moderate. When it comes to that third phase, so that October through Thanksgiving, I think that you can sneak in a little bit of a mini deload prior to this phase, just to give the body time to prepare itself for what's going to come in the next few phases. Because that third phase, I like to bump guys up to 4 times a week of throwing at the high school age. Long toss programs typically start at this point. This is when you'll see a lot of facilities across the country doing a lot of pull downs, things along those lines. Intensity still like moderate to high. That November, December timeframe on that fourth phase, throwing volume continues to increase. Weight room volume would start to taper. And this is where focus would shift a little bit more to high intensity a couple times a week, but the focus starts to shift its way a little bit more towards being on the mound and touching the slope. When you creep near Christmas, I think that it's important to sneak another deload in. This is something that early in the process, I can, honorably admit that I wasn't doing enough of when I was working with the high school kids back in the day, is just sneaking in deloads over that build-up phase. Because those December through January throwing programs get pretty intense as kids are chasing, whether it be velocity gains or it's the most popular time of year, I think, for velo PRs, so on and so forth. And you're starting to get on the mound, so it's just really important to, number one, educate athletes on listening to their body, and number two, understand that a deload is probably necessary around that Christmas time. And a lot of kids travel anyway during that phase or during that time period. So typically works pretty well. That January through February timeframe, throwing volume typically is getting pretty high at that point, where most kids are throwing around 6 days a week with a couple pins a week. If they're a bullpen guy, 2, lower volume, high intent pins make more sense to me. If a kid's a starter, I would encourage more of like a light pen and then a heavier pen later in the week. And it's all about preparing for high school tryouts. So intensity creeps back up, and then as the high school season starts in February or March, we would maintain that same 2 times a week approach on the mound with a couple moderate days sprinkled in. And then we generally want at least 1 full off day per week all year. And during the competitive season, there are kids, and I hate speaking in general terms here because it does depend a lot on the athlete and the requisite stiffness and so on and so forth. But I do think it's important to sneak in some rest, even if it is just 1 day a week, to let the body recover a little bit. Then that May through June, as high school baseball is wrapping up, I think it's important to kind of look back and gauge the workload currently and check out the inning count. If they're a kid that goes into the spring high school season and they're 45, 50 innings in, I think that creating a really, really intentional plan for the summer becomes super important. If they're a kid that throws 15 to 20 innings during the spring, summer ball is where they're going to be, getting a lot of their workload in. And then as they creep into that June, late July, early August time phase, I encourage them to enter another shutdown mode, and then we restart the calendar from there. Things do get a heck of a lot more complicated when you do have that year-round competitor, the warm weather kid that just is competing all year long. And I think that the most important thing in that sense is just educating kids on, number one, I think tracking like total workload throughout the year from an inning standpoint. And then number two, sneaking in the deloads whenever you can, because there are breaks built in.
Yeah. What's interesting is, and I want to get your take on this. we've done the deload stuff with high school guys on the weight room side of things. And I
Hmm.
feel like that stuff almost always takes care of itself, right? It's family vacations, or,
Yep.
they miss a couple days because they've got a big test at school. There's something where, they get sick, whatever it may be. There's, obviously in the era of COVID, there's been, shutdowns for various reasons in that regard, close contacts. The deloads always seem to happen on their own, but the throwing stuff, they always seem to get in. And I think it's vitally important to deload on the throwing stuff. Whereas the strength conditioning stuff, I'm kind of okay with guys just powering through it because they're so adjustable. They always
Yep.
seem to make progress, particularly when they're young and novice. But those mini breaks, as you noted, I think can be so important on the actual skill development side of things.
Absolutely. And I mean, perfect plan on paper always gets derailed. I mean, there's kids will get sick, kids will go on vacation. I mean, there's always something that comes up, especially with that high school demographic. And that's why we always say, I think it's the old adage of we write in pencil, not pen, and not being so married to the plan that you psychologically get thrown off if you have to modify some things. So.
Yeah. I think one other observation, I'm curious to get your take on this, and I remember seeing this all the way back in like 2010, that summer. We had a bunch of kids playing area codes, and it was kind of a prep to a big draft year for a lot of Massachusetts kids in 2011. We had several kids who just had like almost like 1 week recharges. Like it was kind of during that crazy summer travel calendar where they came in and they got some home cooking, they got 3 or 4 lifts in, some will put on 5 or 6 pounds in that, and then they come back out and see a big velo jump. And I always wrestled with, was it just that like they needed to gain a little bit of weight back to get back to where they needed to be? Was it that they just got a little bit of a break from competitive throwing, whatever it was? But like time and time again, I've seen these kind of instances of, 5 to 7 day blocks. You see it like, a high school player whose team stinks and, doesn't go into the postseason. So they get like a 2 week break before summer ball. And there's always like a recharge. It to me, it speaks to like the trainability of high school kids. Like you don't get that in pro guys. Like if anything, you give them a week off and they feel horrible. Whereas like younger guys, just they find like these opportunities to rebound so quickly.
Absolutely. And I think it's just like they're hyper responders to everything and during that time, right? I mean, you can eat like crap and still gain a bunch of good weight. It's just it's that lucky like natural steroid phase of their life, where I 100% agree.
So we always try to do a lightning round on the end, and I gave one of them away. I gave away my looking back. How could Matt Hinkley in 2022 best help Matt Hinkley when he's younger? But I'm gonna give you some other ones. So the first one, who are your favorite pitchers to watch?
Ooh, it's hard for me to pick one. Let me I'll give you a list of 4 here real quick.
Okay.
Number 1 for me is Zach Greinke. He just gives me like Greg Maddux vibes. I think he's a guy that always threw a lot of strikes, changed speeds, and he's just steady Eddie. And actually, I met him back at Kauffman Stadium in his rookie year, and super nice guy. Spent some time talking to me, and I'll never forget that. As a kid, I was super obsessed with Dontrell Willis. I love the big leg kick and just the swagger that he threw with. He always exuded a lot of confidence and had just a presence about him that was kind of always inspirational to me. Randy Johnson's kind of along that same line there. I caught the tail end of his career, from what I can recall as a kid. And always a presence on the mound, and I respected that. You'll notice 3 of the 4 guys I'm going to list off are left-handed.
Yeah.
The last one was Tim Collins.
Yeah.
I was a short lefty from Kansas City, and he gave me a lot of hope as an athlete. It was always just super impressive to me that a guy with the frame that he had could get out of his body what he did. That's always been super cool.
Previous podcast guest too with a good story to tell. So make sure you guys check that out if you haven't heard it.
Yeah.
And so actually I'll build on that one since I used up one of my questions earlier. Of the pitchers that you've interacted with here since you arrived in Florida, who do you feel like has had the most to teach you? Just in conversation and watching, and you've rolled with a lot of the big dogs. So you're allowed to play favorites here. Nobody will bust your chops about it.
Honestly, it's oh man, that's a tough one. I think it's guys.
You can pick a couple. Talk about some good conversations you had, maybe.
Yeah, so like a guy like Sean Gunther. So he comes in, and a lot of the conversations that we have with him are just those old adages of when I'm sitting in the cage and I'm asking a kid to change his sights, whether it be to spin a breaking ball better or to get the breaking ball to land where he wants. he asked me a question the other day that got my wheels spinning a little bit. That was, are you setting your sights on where you're going to start the ball or where the ball is going to land? And for me as an athlete, I was always just a kid that when I was queuing up, like breaking ball adjustments, it was always just change my sights on where I was trying to throw the ball. And he got me to kind of look at that in a little bit of a different light. So that was super impactful. Guys like, like Lou Trevino, like he's a guy that didn't know me from Adam and came in on day one and asked me questions regarding his delivery. And, I think that was super impactful in being able to just chop it up with him on what I saw, what he saw. And it's simple things, honestly, when you're talking about guys with that much, time in the show. But something as simple as moving his hands back a few inches or moving his hands forward a few inches, or, the timing of when his hands are separating and how impactful that can be when it comes to the result of the pitch. That's been pretty impactful as well.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Those guys will be super impressed that you gave him shouts out. And Gunther is on the list of guys to have because he was one of the coolest COVID miss a year of minor league baseball development stories. I was actually just pulling it up while you were talking. Max fastball velo in 2019 was 92.7. This year it was 95 even. So guy put on 2.3 ticks over the course of a year and a half and made a big league debut this year. So easy guy to celebrate and cheer for.
And that's another guy that's like, he's not necessarily gifted from a height standpoint and has found a way to pitch in the major leagues, which is just, I'm always going to bat for those guys. So.
Good call. All right. So let's talk about a must-read book for both a player and then one for coaches that are listening to this.
So from a player standpoint, I really like the book 90% Mental by Bob Tewksbury. I just like the fact that he's hammering home routines, and there's just some really, really good baseball storytelling in there.
Yeah.
I think that some of those things can be super impactful for players, just understanding that some of the best in the game go through exactly what you're going through, no matter what level you're playing at. From a coaching standpoint, I really this was a book I read several years ago. It's just Conscious Coaching by Brett Bartholomew.
Yeah. It's a great one.
I think building buy-in is such an important thing. And I think environment and trust are everything personally. And I try to create an environment as a pitching coach that would encourage buy-in and trust in me. Again, it comes back to the old adage of people don't really care what you know until they know that you care. That book hammers a lot of those points home, and it's a great book. So
I love it. And then last but not least, this is a Whopper question. What to you is the next frontier in developing pitchers? What gets you excited? Where do you think we're going to get substantially better in the years ahead?
So I think that just global integration between all the different facets, whether it be player development and, the medical side, or analytics and player development. I think that as we learn more, I think the gap between all the different phases of development and just baseball in general are going to be closed. I don't think it's going to be enough to just be a pitching coach here going forward. I think you're going to have to know a little bit about strength conditioning. You're going to have to know a little bit about, physical therapy and what massage therapists are doing with guys. I think that baseball in and of itself, from an integration standpoint, is just going to continue to blossom. And this is something internally that Cap, Elms, Mark, and myself have been talking a lot about lately, is just the wrist. And understanding different mobility requirements to execute certain pitches. So for instance, if an athlete is limited in an ulnar deviation and I'm trying to teach them a traditional changeup and they continue to struggle, how can I change my coaching strategy to get them to kill spin or speed? More times than not, we're going to go to a split change grip or something that would be a little bit more conducive to success there. But I think that just understanding kinematics from the elbow down is going to be something that we focus a little bit more of our attention on going forward. And I think we have a ton to learn in that regard.
Those are all good points and stuff that the wrist stuff fascinates me as well. Credit to Cap for really getting the wheels turning for me a little bit on that.
Absolutely.
So, Matt, you've got an awesome social media presence on Twitter. It's at I am Matt Hinkley. And then on Instagram, it's Matt_Hinkley_pitching. And then you also have officially taken the reins along with Matt Elmeyer to the CSP Florida Instagram handle, which is at CSPFL_pitching. And that's a wealth of highlights on a daily basis from our pro and college and high school arms. So lots of good stuff there. Can't thank you enough for coming on, man. There's lots of really good stuff here for parents and kids and coaches and, folks from all different walks of life and points in development. So thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Absolutely. I'm fired up to be down here, and I'm really enjoying it. It's been a lot of fun.
So. Absolutely. All right, we will do this again soon, and we're gonna have to get you involved on a future roundtable, because I know we can round up some good troops to have a good discussion on. We did 2-seam roundtable last time, and we'll have to do cutter or change up or curveball or something.
Oh, I'd love it. Bring it on.
Sounds good. Thanks, bub.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.